Brilliant. Well, thank you all very much indeed. We don't run introductions on these panels because you've heard from the panelists already, so we'll get straight into it if we may. Broadly, this is going to take sort of two different parts, one of which is how we're getting on, second which is, what are the problems, and finally, inevitably, what do we need? What do we need from policymakers and government? So you'll see the shape of that. We'd love to leave a bit of time for questions from the floor before the end, so if you can be thinking of those, when we get to sort of 10 minutes before the end, we'll see who's got a burning question. But let's get going. Chris, we're lucky to have you to talk about electric buses. You sort of wait ages for a question about electric buses, and then we've got 3 or 4. Perfect. So the UK is actually in a pretty good space here with buses. We're one of the leading bus markets. How's it going? How's the transition to zero emissions going from your point of view?
Thanks, Chris. Well, as you said, we're in quite a fortunate position in the UK in that we are the largest EV bus market in Europe, which is great. And I guess the other positive thing is we don't have a ZEV mandate, so lucky us. There's exceptions to that. So, for example, the city we're in right now, London, you can't sell a diesel bus into London. So,
might need a handheld if we have one spare.
Microphones.
Oh, no.
Better. There we go. Yes, so you can't sell a diesel bus into London. So there are regions of the UK where there are definitely mandates in place. In terms of how that's been developed is through a combination of government incentives through what they call the zero emission bus schemes or zebra schemes. Just conscious my microphone is cutting in.
Yeah, we're I think probably at the back hearing you in and out. If we have a handheld we could use for now, that'd be really helpful. Chris, I might come back to you if that's all right.
By all means,
we'll come back to buses because I want to make sure. Oh, here we are.
Thank you. Hopefully that's better. So how have we got to this position where over 27% of buses in 2025 were zero emission? A combination of government incentive through the so-called zero emission bus schemes, which have kind of run their course now and almost disappeared, but also now increasingly through operators recognising that the TCO model for buses is actually, for electric buses, is actually more positive than for internal combustion engines. Now, again, similar to what Jan mentioned earlier, buses are bought as an asset. They're not private purchase. And operators run that asset for 20 years. And so over those 20 years, it's relatively easy now to demonstrate that the TCO model for a battery electric bus is more positive than internal combustion engines, than diesel buses, and therefore under that model, buses are increasingly being bought as battery electric vehicles. There are exceptions to that, particularly for the smaller operators where access to charging, and this is going to be a constant theme, I think, through the course of this session, is more difficult. But if you think about the big groups, certainly they are purchasing now on a commercial basis.
Yeah, and Chris, I'm interested, I suppose, as to the opportunities from buses. As typically they're plugged in overnight, whereas with HGVs they're sort of on a different schedule. There are advantages for you when it comes to how you approach decarbonisation, that you've got a stationary asset for the night.
Yeah, for sure. A couple of advantages with buses. Three, I would say, actually. First of all, you know exactly where a bus is going to be during the day because the routes are fixed and set. Different for coaches, but for passenger transit buses, it's a fixed route. Secondly, buses don't tend to do huge mileage during the day, particularly, again, here in London. You think about a bus, it's pretty much doing walking pace. So, 200 miles is probably the limit of what most buses would do during a day. So in terms of range anxiety, we can quite easily cover that with battery electric solutions. And then thirdly, again, as you said, Chris, buses are parked up in a depot overnight for a short period of time, admittedly. So that you know where it's going to be. You've got access to chargers. Therefore, charging a bus is relatively simple if you have access to grid connections.
Of course. Brilliant. Thank you ever so much. Amy, coming to you, same question really. How's it going? We're clearly making a lot of progress and we're hearing about new infrastructure, new truck models, to technology developing and increasing amounts of collaboration. But from your perspective, how is it going? How are you seeing the market?
So you referenced some good points around kind of what's in the public domain of how this journey's going. So I'd say it's quite mixed, really. So we started in 2019 with our first electric vehicle. We've had a full range of the trucks available for several years now. So in terms of the technology, it's here. The trucks can do the job. There will be incremental improvements as technology develops, but it's here. And then you come into all of the areas that have been discussed already around infrastructure, around collaboration, around combined ambition, which then is what's resulting in the uptake in the market. It is behind pace, I would say. So the ZHID projects have been a really good example to see a number of vehicles go on the road in last year and the year before. And also we will see the first charging infrastructure through those ZHID projects come online this year. And that's really important. That's made that move forward. But actually, outside of that, operators are still quite tentative about making that move to electric. The challenges are the total cost of ownership, although that's has been largely focused on the cost of the truck. In lots of cases, when you just think about the cost of the truck, you can actually get to that situation where the total cost of ownership looks far more healthy. When you start to factor in the costs of power, and if you're talking about one truck and you're charging it at the depot overnight, that might not be prohibitive. But when you start to think about the costs of power for a significant proportion of a fleet, that's when it really starts to have an impact on the total cost of ownership. And that's the costs for developing the infrastructure. But the bigger challenge, and this is the one that we see is perhaps more unforeseen until you get there, is the cost of securing power and the cost of securing power for the future, so you can then build your strategic plan to transition your fleet. And all of these challenges, when you bring them together, do cause that uncertainty about how do we get from a very small percentage of electric vehicles, so we're less than 1% in terms of annual registrations for electric, to a larger proportion. How do we grow that, given that we're seeing these challenges when it comes to the energy system, the cost of power, and how that all comes together in terms of the total cost of ownership? Those operators that have already made that move into electrification are seeing the benefits of that. They're seeing where there are opportunities. They're seeing where there are requirements to change their operation. And that's really important learning, and that is what will set us up. But currently it's not enough. The uptake isn't broad enough. The other technology I just wanted to talk about is around the opportunity for gas. So I know this is kind of an electric-focused event, but in terms of decarbonisation, we see gas-powered vehicles as a real opportunity. You haven't got some of the challenges around total cost of ownership, all considering the fluctuations we've seen in fuel in the last couple of weeks. But in general, you see a commercial opportunity when it comes to making that move to gas trucks for long-haul operations. The challenge there is around how you refuel LNG trucks, which is the technology that we offer at Volvo. But we've seen a big investment in terms of LNG refueling infrastructure in the last year, and that is set to continue. So that creates a new opportunity. LNG, gas-powered trucks, create an opportunity to reduce your CO2 emissions compared to diesel, and that's just making that move to fossil diesel. But if you consider, fossil gas, but if you consider biogas as a fuel as well, you're seeing real strong decarbonisation opportunities there. So considering both technologies, there are routes forward, depending on the operation, depending on the total cost of ownership, to decarbonise now.
So I think from your perspective, not letting perfect get in the way of much better, and to be considering more than one technology for fuel types is probably the right step.
Absolutely, yeah. I think if we focus on perfect, we won't move forward. We can't ignore the fact that there are challenges. We have to find a way to move forward with those challenges and then overcome them as we get to them.
Amy, thank you so much. I'm going to jump you, Michael, forgive me. Ian, coming to you. What's your perspective? Does any of that resonate? What's your journey looking like at the moment?
It all resonates. Our journey, if I look at DHL Group, it's absolutely core to our strategy. It's our fourth bottom line, sustainability, for our business. And if we look at it at a global level, we're accelerating electric in the commercial van space. Our express business in particular, we operate, I think, are now just over 40,000 electric vans across the globe. So a huge amount of equipment. But here in the UK, I work for DHL Supply Chain that works in contract logistics. We operate a fleet of around 4,500 heavy goods vehicles, and the picture's a bit different. But despite that, we finished 2025 with 34% of all the fuels we operate within our business being sustainable. That was a mix of sustainable fuels like HVO and biomethane. We do both bio-CNG and a lot of bio-LNG, and they've allowed us to accelerate, move at scale, and actually, I guess most importantly, we've heard this today, is maintain productivity, which is really important for our customers, and has a bearing on TCO as well. That being said, we also do have electric in that mix, and we've very early Volvos. We had a 16-ton rigid back in 2020, and we've got some electric Arctics on operations at the moment, and they've really helped build our understanding and start taking our customers on a journey of what this means for them. And it's actually shaping kind of new, pretty significant projects at the moment, looking at our energy strategy, looking at our property strategy, and how we make sure we're fit for the future. And that customer bit is probably the last thing I'd touch on this question, really, because actually, as we look to move this forward, those customers are hugely important, because at the end of the day, they pay for the fuels and vehicles in their supply chain. And, we need to not just engage them on costs, but actually, I think really importantly, we need to start engaging our customers on contract term. In our business, we see an average transport contract of 3 years at the moment. And when we look at that and how that supports us in our ability to invest in the infrastructure, the grid connections, the vehicles, and everything needed, that gets pretty challenging, really. So we're now working on, trying to take our customers on that journey with us to say, with longer deals, we can actually invest in your behalf, and we can start, kind of moving down this path to the ultimate goal of zero emission transport.
Ian, thank you very much. And that theme of customers we'll come back to when we come back to you, Chris. But in the meantime, Michael, tell us about Voltempo. Tell us about the role that the company can play in this whole decarbonisation journey.
Sure. So Voltempo was one of the winners of the ZHID funding when DFT provided £200 million across 4 consortiums to trial electric and hydrogen vehicles. So with our consortium, with people like Marks and Spencer and Wincanton, Maritime and many others, and some of the SMEs as well, we were able to get some early trucks onto the road and the infrastructure in place as well. And that infrastructure will be shared, so it's actually in depots, so in secure environments, but the depot operators will then open that up to other people to be able to access it as well. So effectively, it's a cost-effective way of creating a network, if you like, a charging network. We made the decision early on that if you're going to put in charging, you put in more charging than you need now, so you've got the confidence when you turn up, you're going to be able to charge, and also that that fleets can then buy more vehicles later on and not have to go through that pain barrier again of getting the grid upgraded and so on. And also we took the decision to put in megawatt charging before the vehicles are available, because there's no point putting in lower power charging and then ripping it out and starting again a couple of years down the line. So very much looking at that future model and future growth. So it's still early days. We're rolling out the infrastructure now, we're getting the trucks on the road now. Some fleets have had their vehicles on the road now for just over a year, 15 months or so. Others are just coming on board now. And the delay on that has been getting access to the grid and all of those sorts of things which you'll hear time and time again. Yeah. But the great thing is by having a consortium like that and the power of pulling people together is you have a voice and you actually have an opportunity to say, okay, what do we need to do to make things better for the future, so that we've got the early learnings, we're learning how the vehicles work, and what we're finding is as fleets get the vehicles on the road and run them for about a year, then they've got the confidence, okay, now we can buy more because we know this actually is working. It doesn't work everywhere, but they're getting the experience of where it works effectively for them. And we've also had fleet operators really push the barrier. How far can we get this truck to drive? So, Kuhn and Nagel have been taking trucks down from East Midlands up into Germany and down into France, 1,700 kilometres on one route, with charging stops on the way. And we're learning a huge amount from that as well. So we know that technically, it's possible to do a route between the United Kingdom and Germany, for example. Operationally, we found there were problems with that, but now we know what those problems are, so we can fix them. So it's very much learning together and we're stronger together, if you like, than we are as individual businesses.
Yeah. Well, I think you and the other operators in this space, the kind of the Aegis and the Mylants, are building ahead of demand needs to be sort of commended as well to try and create confidence in that sector. So thank you very much. We'll come back to that. I'm conscious that actually we've got a lot to get through, and we might just gently speed up the answers. That's entirely guilty of that mainly. Chris, coming back to you, we talked about customers, and Ian mentioned quite rightly, they are the sort of the lifeblood of the decisions we have to take. What are customers telling you about what they want from buses, and how do you deliver that?
I'll try and keep this as brief as possible, Chris. Well, the UK bus market is essentially segmented into three major segments. There's the big operators, the likes of Stagecoach and Go Ahead Group, that maybe operate 5,000 or 6,000 buses in the UK. There's now the introduction of franchising through the Better Buses Bill recently passed, where the purchasing power, if you like, on buses is being handed to the local authorities. And then you've got the retail sector, which are kind of smaller operators ranging from maybe 100 or 200 vehicles in the UK down to the kind of mom and pop, as you like, operators that might only have 5 buses. And they have different requirements. But essentially, the first two groups, they're over the hurdle now of purchasing electric vehicles. They recognise, again, as I mentioned, the TCO model is positive in terms of buying electric products. So kind of linked into to Jan's presentation earlier, they want an asset that has a high level of uptime, that is simple to operate and run, that is efficient, therefore minimising their electric costs, and is a comfortable place for the passengers to sit and and undertake their journey. For the smaller groups and the smaller operators, it's a much more difficult purchasing proposition, because they also have to be able to charge their bus, and so they're really looking for us to help them on that journey of how do they get to a position where they can electrify their operations. So that's in that segment of the market, we're trying to introduce them to potential novel funding routes to get funding for infrastructure and the capex of the vehicles, and to provide as easy a transition as possible. So it's slightly different in that segment to the kind of bigger groups where it's all about having a reliable asset.
Absolutely, might be more as a service type proposition.
Indeed.
On that sort of purchasing proposition as well, Amy, clearly buying trucks has got a longer purchasing cycle than a car or a van. I mean, 2035, not that far away. Are we running out of time to get things done?
I don't think we're running out of time, and we have to remember that 2035 is an end of sale date, not an outright ban.
Yep. So
operators still have still have time to think about where they fit in their decarbonised options into their fleet renewal. I think we've wasted some time. I think we could have moved faster, but it doesn't mean that we can't recover that. We're just putting more pressure on the end. The concern is the availability of power at the locations where you need it when you start to think about making that transition to scale. There are a lot of technical challenges to making that move in terms of weights and dimensions, impact on payload. They're not insurmountable. They need to be addressed through legislation to allow operators to be able to make that move to electric vehicles and not face a payload penalty compared to diesel. Getting power to where we need it, at the scale we need it for 2035, should be an absolute priority, because that completely affects the scale of that transition.
Excellent. Well, that sounds like I'll be in a job still, which is good. Ian, Chris mentioned total cost of ownership as well. Clearly, that is hugely important. Where are you seeing that at the moment? Where are the numbers looking like?
It's very important. It drives all our decisions. And we now add the carbon emissions into our TCO models. So we calculate what we call an abatement cost, which is how much do I have to spend to save 1 tonne of CO2. So we can start to compare apples for apples across all technologies. Today, heavy battery electric, I'm genuinely struggling to make it stack up. The reality is that some of our depots with big electrical connections is the energy cost there means that just on a pure fuel cost basis, I have a higher running cost, let alone having to worry about how do I amortize a more expensive asset. And actually, on a truck side, we'll typically buy a vehicle over around 5 years for a primary life, so it's quite short. So that just exacerbates the challenge here for us as well. That being said, we are actually looking to try and accelerate and do more in this space. And, kind of at the moment, I'm looking to try and kind of probably steal from the bus market in a sense and look at our operations where we're running heavy rigids. We have more kind of, we'd love to sweat vehicles as much as possible, but the reality is some of our customers and operations just need daytime deliveries. And so we have a long dwell period for vehicles where, like a bus depot, we can charge overnight. We've got relatively kind of short regional operations. So actually that's an area I think we can accelerate, and we can push and support our TCO model through a longer life on that asset, that primary asset, push them out to 10 years, which for us is, as a vehicle operator on a primary life of vehicles, pretty long.
Excellent. Brilliant. Michael, coming to you quickly, sort of changing tack slightly. What have you seen as the major challenges for building the infrastructure we need to decarbonise and electrify?
So clearly, grid access is a big issue. And the consultation paper that's out at the moment, we need to be responding to that. What we are finding, however, is that government is listening very clearly. And there's been a lot of work being done within DESNES and the creation of NESO and all of that sort of stuff to change the structure of the industry fundamentally. Now that gives the fleet operators, and again working in consortiums, an opportunity to say, okay, well, if we create a long-term rollout plan, big ifs in this, of course, but if we can create that long-term rollout plan and we can share that with the at a consolidated level back to the grid operators and demonstrate how much energy we need, how much energy, how much power, at what locations over the next 10 years, next 15 years, whatever. Looking what that long-term modelling is, actually they can start investing in their own grid connections and upgrades at the time we need it. And we can also start learning, okay, you can't have a better power there in 2028, but you could have it in 2030. Okay, fine, and now you can create that long-term model. So actually we can bring it back into our power as an industry to start solving these problems. Not next week, not next month, but infrastructure takes a long time. So that's a sort of thing where that we're focusing on to solve that problem. We've also got to take into account, of course, so that the type of vehicles are going to change. Weights and lengths issues which government are looking at right now, which is great, and they're modelling it on the strategic road network right now. Also give us the opportunity to look at what future HGV models could look like. And particularly with the uptake of autonomous vehicles in the next few years. We don't see them on the roads yet, but it won't be long before they are here. And so we're looking at that within our consortium about, what are autonomous vehicles, how do they work, can we actually start testing and developing them? And the answer to that is yes. And so we'll have an autonomous vehicle trial within our programme within a couple of years. So, and what does that mean for the energy industry? But also what it means for productivity for the industry, which is where it gets really exciting, because then we can see a real pathway for switching to decarbonisation.
Brilliant, thank you. There's an awful lot in there where we probably haven't got time to go into now. We're running out of time quite rapidly, and I would like to leave time for a bit of questions. So I'm going to now come to the what do we want from policy point, and if we can keep this really snappy. And I think we've probably dealt with access to power and grid possibly. If there's a policy request or requirement that's on the wish list, please speak now or forever hold your peace. Chris.
So I'll avoid the access to grid connections as part of policy, but again, it is important, and I actually stood in the International Summit 2 years ago and they said exactly the same message. So one of the frustrations, I guess, is it just is not happening quickly enough, and that is the real bottleneck or the throttle on rollout of battery electric buses in the UK. The other important policy, I would say, is just around building a strong and sustainable supply chain in the UK and Europe. You can't get away from the fact that we are reliant on countries and sectors outside of Europe for a lot of the critical components that we put into a bus. And obviously geopolitics, we all recognise what's going on in the world right now. It becomes a very, very difficult proposition. And so building a really strong, stable supply chain in the UK and in Europe is really critical to the survival of the industry here in the UK. And I think that's really important.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Chris. Amy, same question to you.
Thank you. I've got two. So
Brilliant.
The first one is to address the challenges we have around weights and dimensions so that we're not seeing payload compromise by making that move to battery electric vehicles. The second one is to create a compelling case for operators to make that move now by addressing the different levers you've got to pull in the total cost of ownership. So that could be by incentivising that move to battery electric. It could be about disincentivising staying as you are now. We've got to create something that drives widespread market demand.
Yeah.
And that's what's missing at the moment. And it's, to me, it all comes down to putting a value on reducing those CO2 emissions rather than just looking at the operating costs of the vehicle and the purchasing cost of the vehicle.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And we can all get behind that. I'm actually going to skip you from Michael, come back to you. Ian.
So, yeah, I agree with all of those. They would have been on my list, and I think it's probably, if we had time, a very long list. I'd probably just add, and we've heard it today earlier in the sessions as well, about a joined up approach across government, because actually, you know, we're seeing fleet policy timelines accelerate, and we're not really seeing the kind of infrastructure delivery accelerate at the same pace. So I think there's absolutely that. And then I think, you know, kind of on top of those, I'd probably also kind of ask for some support around a multi-technology pathway, in all honesty. Our customers have some pretty big 2030 goals. In fact, we've got some customers that want to be net zero by 2030. And actually, to be able to achieve that, we won't be able to do it all with battery electric, you know, in those timeframes. So, you know, we need the confidence to be able to take them on that journey and accelerate things.
Brilliant. Michael.
We've got to look at what's going to drive decarbonisation, and productivity is really important. You know, fleet operators have got a tough market. You're working on 1% margins if you're lucky. Yep. And they haven't got the money to invest and so on. So things like the weights and lengths changes, which are being looked at now, is fantastic, because that helps swing the argument. That's important. The freeing up the grid issues, again, the consultation is that's going into that is important as well. And looking at you know, how we can get a more stable energy price going forward as well is going to be vitally important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we have grid, supply chain, joined up government, a bit of carrot and stick on the market. We have support for multi-fuel pathways. We have energy price stability. So there are many, many things we can deliver. I wonder if anyone in the audience, we've got a few minutes left, if there are a couple of questions we have time for. Gentleman at the front here. I feel like some sort of auction, actually.
Hello, Richard Amnagama from Mikos Technologies. So picking up on grid connection and joined up government, how is much consideration being given to battery buffering so that you can both not require necessarily the same upgrade to the grid connection and smooth out the lumpiness of renewables generation, and maybe getting the government to incentivise that?
I think it's a really good question, and actually quite often, yeah, batteries are seen as a big capex issue on a decarb point, but actually if you smooth it out into OPEX, or you say we can connect quicker, we're making money, we've got a cheaper grid connection, I think this is particularly relevant for the buses, actually, Chris. I wonder if I might come to you quickly on that one.
I wouldn't say it's made huge inroads so far. We've done a couple of vehicle-to-grid trials in the past, which have had some success, but it's certainly slow to roll out. Now, obviously, in terms of grid connections, it's more our operators that have the requirement to expend the capital, and I haven't yet seen battery buffering being part of their strategy. That's not to say that couldn't come. Probably Michael's in a better position than myself to talk about that, actually.
Yeah, we're actually doing a trial on that at the moment. So we're modelling vehicle to grid and seeing what the benefits of that are. But also not just from the fleet operators and the energy sector, but also from the OEM perspective. Because the risk, of course, with vehicle to grid is that the vehicle manufacturers are taking all the risk and getting none of the reward. So actually, how do you make it work for the whole sector? And that's really important. But we've also got data models across the whole country which identify where the black spots are with the grid, and then looking at how we can put battery energy in as part of that smoothing out process. And we certainly see that as a good way of both helping deployment of vehicles in the early stage, but also in some cases where you want to expand from, say, 6 vehicles to 30, and that's the only way you're going to be able to do it.
Thank you. Amy, Ian, any comments on that one?
So we've had to do it to beat a delayed grid connection. So we've had to put in a kind of a microgrid and battery supported to be able to kind of, beat a 2-year delay to get power into site, which is pretty reasonable 2 years when you look at some of the requests. Absolutely, we're looking at it, how we kind of, use it for peak shaving, and actually if we're going to install infrastructure into new builds, because we develop some of our own sites, actually how do we use that to kind of amortize the investment early on while the vehicles catch up as well. The challenge is actually a grid connection that can take two-way kind of transmission, to be honest. And we've got one development at the moment where we're being told 2038 before we can take that capability on.
Brilliant. Amy, anything further on that?
No, pretty much the same as what's already been said, to be honest.
Fantastic. I'm getting a message that says wrap up, please. I think we can get one more question in, but it's quick. The lady in the red here, if that's all right? Apologies if I've missed someone else.
Emma Guthrie from the Hydrogen Energy Association. I'm obviously coming from the hydrogen sector. I'm really pleased to hear reference to, I guess, alternatives, let's say molecule-based solutions. And I wonder what the, let's say, the key members that have references in the panel would like to see from government to have perhaps a slightly more broad-minded view on the transition to decarbonising and supporting a range of different technologies.
Fantastic. And with apologies, it's going to be very short answers, but is there anything we can ask for government on hydrogen and alternative fuels?
I'll start. It's simply availability and cost of hydrogen. Right now in the TCO models, because of the cost of hydrogen and ability to get to access to it, particularly green hydrogen, it just doesn't allow for a profitable vehicle versus a battery electric. So it would be support for availability of hydrogen, I would say.
I mean, the government did have the High Haul programme as part of ZHID, which was an all-hydrogen programme. And even with the huge subsidies available, 80% off the price of the vehicles and infrastructure and everything else, they could not get it to work. And we're seeing the same with hydrogen bus trials and everything else. They're closing down. I think the message is quite clear at the moment from most of the OEMs and everything else that actually right now they're focusing on battery electric. And I think as an industry we need to be showing that message, because it's available now. We can start doing something, and there's a model for total cost of ownership. That's not to say that hydrogen doesn't have a case in the future in some areas. It's still, the vehicles aren't available, the infrastructure isn't available, it's too expensive. It's a long, long way off, I think, before we'll start seeing that around.
Michael, thank you. Amy, anything?
Yeah, so I agree with that. So, I mean, we're developing our hydrogen fuel cell vehicle at the moment. We'll see that in serial production end of the decade. I agree with what Michael said around the challenges with actually demonstrating hydrogen now. The vehicles aren't available and the infrastructure isn't available. We absolutely see a role for hydrogen in terms of the future product mix. I believe the majority in the UK will be battery electric, and then there will be a role for hydrogen for particular use cases. But we do have some way to get some time before we have to think about both technologies. We can focus on battery electric now and really drive that forward.
Thank you very much. Ian, forgive me, I can feel the sort of crosshairs just being lined up on me now. So,
It's fine.
perhaps you could all please join me in saying a huge thank you to this panel. It's been really, really interesting. Thank you.